So if you're if you're watching this video, it probably means that you maybe made it through the first video, and therefore you might have some further interest. Now I watched my video back, and I'm also trying to use this as a broader point of teaching about academic practice and what I think it is that we as people who are aspiring to have an academic take on the world try to do. So a bit like when you write a first draft of your essay, hopefully you read it, I watched back my video, and hopefully you bring some critical thought to that to try to think about how it might be developed. And one of the key process skills here for effective academic thinking and critical thinking is to try to already for yourself see the gaps and the opportunities and the likelihood where an external person would say, well, yeah, you've said this, but what about this? And in constructing your essay, when you rewrite it, you try to then sort of preemptively deal with those potential critiques, not just as a point of just trying to be right, but as a point of trying to reflect yourself and to make sure that your underlying thoughts are as robust and as appropriate as you can possibly make them, and then communicate it in a way that sort of tries to skip past any discussion between you and someone else that might be unnecessary. So you try to sort of skip ahead in your collective understanding. So I could have remade my video, but I thought I would add to it. And I just want to touch on a few points that I think would be very ready critiques of the outline that I've suggested. Now, the first thing is that I know as you as students, the entirety of your education pretty much has been strongly focused on face-to-face learning opportunities. Now, if I and my colleagues have done our jobs well, you will see that those are valuable experiences, and you will hopefully think that that is a good way of an effective way of learning. And a lot of people would then extend that argument to say, well, actually, I really insist on having face-to-face learning because tuition fees are what they are, and I want to learn and what have you. And I completely appreciate the core of that principle. But what I would suggest to you, and again, this relates to a bigger question of global sustainable development, is that all of us as humans only have our existing knowledge and experience with which to work as we're facing new situations. And a lot of the time, our tendency is to think in what might be characterized as a conservative way. We've always done it this way and we know it works, even though maybe there are questions about it. I prefer to stick with this because I know where I'm at. Now, I would suggest to you at the macro level, if we continue to think about lots of important issues in that way, again, I'll use the example of climate change, we are in a lot of trouble because the continuation along a certain trajectory is increasing negative impacts, is increasing externalities, and is increasing pent-up risk in the system, all of which I think is pushing us in a very unhelpful direction. And if you accept the idea of planetary boundaries, as we've discussed in environmental principles, there is a point at which it's too late. So we need to think creatively and innovatively about ways of doing things. And often, I think now increasingly, we need to think more and more radically because the incremental adjustments around the margin are not getting the curve in the case of sort of CO2 emissions and CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere down and back where we need them to be. And I think we can apply that to lots of things. We need to think outside the box. And my view on this is, yes, I agree, and I am very invested in the idea of face-to-face teaching and learning spaces and places. I think it can be very effective. But I don't think this means that other alternatives are necessarily worse. And I think what we need to do is to go back, as I was suggesting in my first video, to the first principles. So not responding to sort of the high-level categories of lockdown, not lockdown, the rule is to wear a mask, the rule is not to wear a mask. But to think about the underlying principles as to why we do any one particular thing anyway, and try to distill those. So we distill the value of what we need, and we recreate it in a different place, in a different way. So we retain the value, but we try to reduce the things that we don't want. Now, I'm very invested as a teacher, and hopefully it's a fairly intuitive thing to say that when you're given information, you doesn't mean you learn it. So you sit in a lecture and you listen, or you read a paper. It doesn't mean you now know that information. What you then need to do is to take that information and to use it actively. We talk about active learning opportunities and you having to think. I think I might have said that in the past. So you're taking the new information, you're doing something active in your brain with it, using it in a certain way, or sort of repackaging it and maybe expressing it. So that's why we get you to talk to each other a lot. Read the paper, talk to someone about the paper. If you go through the process of thinking, actually, what was the paper really about? What do I remember? And then you express it to someone else. If you can do that, then you've started to learn things about it. If you read it and you can't really explain it to someone, or in a way that they understand, or in a way that they think is what you're saying but actually isn't what you're saying, then maybe your learning process can be developed. So the important principles for face-to-face learning, and that's why we have workshops, is so you can use information that we've delivered to you, presented to you, in an active way, work with it, repackage it, to try to help it stick in your brain. And obviously just doing it once doesn't help. You have to go on a number of cycles of that. And the more you do that, so when you do revision, for example, the more it might stick in your brain. And then when you come to apply that on a daily basis at work, the knowledge becomes so readily accessible to you that you very much know it, and you increasingly become an expert in it. So that's how we try to use face-to-face time. Now, I very much believe that online learning opportunities can be constructed in exactly the same way. We can deliver to you information, we can share information through audio-visual presentation, through you reading. Then we can create active learning opportunities in the Moodle environment or elsewhere that perform the important work of that active thinking. So, in my view, we can retain actually the core of what matters from the face-to-face, and we can pop it up in the online environment. And that's why I believe that the online version can be just as a high quality. We are certainly not experts in that, but where we apply those principles, that's something I think we can deliver for you. I can also totally appreciate that students would say, well, actually, I just like being around other people motivates me. It's just nice to see people in real life. And I can totally appreciate the value of that, or the point of that. I experienced the same thing. I miss my colleagues. However, my first point would be to put that on the axis of need and justification, as balanced against the likelihood of that creating vectors and having certain outcomes. But also, second of all, I believe that we can start to replace that value in other ways, and the principle of that value in other ways. So for my modules, you will find that I will be actively encouraging and requiring you, even if you're working at a physical distance online, to work together. And we can do this in two ways. So one, you can work together in the temporal sense. So between you and a buddy, or you and a wider group of your friends, you can say, right, this hour between 10 and 11, we're going to work on the food Moodle, and we're going to watch the presentation at the same time, and then we're going to interact with these active activities. So it might be thinking about something or researching about something, and then writing a few hundred words as a way to actively process that and to create something, and then to try to bounce it off other people and have a discussion. In some cases, I have said, before you do this activity, I want you to email or phone or text or WhatsApp or Facebook one of your colleagues, and I want you to have a discussion about it. See what do you think, and then what I want you to input into this is an agreed set of ideas, and then we can then compare and contrast those ideas with ideas of other parties and other pairs. So you can construct, you can work together without being in the same room. And of course, if you so choose as individuals and you want to do that physically together in a space, but yet in a socially distanced way, then that can be your choice. The university, we could say you can come in and use the seminar room for this time. There's not necessarily going to be a member of staff there facilitating it, but you can come in and use the space because it's socially distanced and we have sanitizer, etc. Come in and wear your masks and do the thing together. Or in your own household, where you're obviously not required to be socially distancing anyway. So I think if we think creatively, we can still have the social value of those interactions. We just need to think past the sort of the stereotyped understanding we have, and maybe the conservative response that we have. Think to the principles of actually why is it that we get value out of that, and to rebuild it. Now, of course, I agree that university has other responsibilities to their students, and I think it would be unreasonable to say that we don't want to see you at all. You're banned from coming to campus. But I think we can create other opportunities for actual physical interaction with staff and with fellow students in ways that is not maximising face-to-face teaching, but is a sort of a plug into a system that minimises face-to-face teaching, and maximises online provision. Thinking in the wider sense and thinking about my interactions with the university and my other concerns, because of course, as we know, sustainable development is not easy. We're trying to mix environmental preservation with health for all, with reducing inequality, with maximising economic growth and jobs. And there are trade-offs. And one of the highly relevant and resonant things that the university has said is that where we don't have face-to-face teaching, we have lots of employees whose function isn't maybe necessary. And again, I think this comes back to ability to think a bit more creatively. So yes, if people aren't using rooms, maybe you could say that, yeah, we don't need as many cleaners, and therefore we don't need to pay those cleaners, and therefore those cleaners lose their jobs, or they don't get hours, or whatever else. However, I don't accept the idea that financial situations are a fixed reality of physics. I think it is possible to make other adjustments that mean that as an institution, you can prioritize not the kind of arbitrary, is this function required? No, then you're sacked, versus is this function needed? Yes, well then we'll keep on paying you. You can replace that approach with a genuinely values-driven approach where we say, we as a university are a community of people, and we have a responsibility to one another, and the institution has some responsibility to its employees to think in creative ways that mean that they don't need to lose their jobs, and that their incomes, which already might be quite low, do not need to be compromised. And this is where we come to the difficult question of inequalities. I think, and also we come to another area in which the university would probably be displeased if they were aware of that I'm expressing my views on this. If we look to the private sector, as financial pressure started to be imposed, companies started to look at their pay structures, and they started to look not straight away to whose jobs they could cut and who they could kick out, but they looked at areas of spending that weren't so necessary. Now, the university has done this. There's a lot of restrictions. Basically, all non-essential and externally funded research has been frozen. Despite my laptop being on the verge of death, getting a new one was a complex process. So the purse strings have been tightened. One of the possibilities that has not been explored, and in fact, university management have refused outright to explore, is the idea that some of the people who work for the university who earn large amounts of money could possibly consider earning a bit less. You might be aware that one of the first actions of the university was to basically say we won't have any sessionally paid tutors because academics aren't doing research. We can put them into teaching. We have to pay them anyway. So the sessional teachers go because we're worried about our numbers. A lot of us at that point said, well, that seems a bit unreasonable because the sessionally paid teachers are absolutely essential to running the university in the best of times. They're also people who probably don't have a hugely stable financial situation. They're probably doing a PhD. No one does a PhD and works at the same time because they want to, usually. They do it because they have to. And a lot of us said this is very unfair and unreasonable. The university took a very legalistic approach. They said these people don't have proper contracts, so we can ask them not to work for us. Where other people have proper contracts, it's more complicated. However, I don't accept that that is a fixed possibility. I think if the university management wanted to, and if the university management were invested in the genuine value-driven principles of what we would call sustainable development, they could think differently, as indeed has been demonstrated by universities across the UK, where particularly very senior members of management have taken voluntary pay cuts in order to support those people who are less well off. So while I don't have the numbers, well, actually I do have some numbers. I think it was calculated that around £5 million could be saved if people earning in excess of £100,000 at university took a variety of pay cuts, I think ranging from like 5 to 15 or 20% or something, which you would hope those high capacity individuals could shoulder and would be willing to do so in order to support less fortunate people. Quite how the numbers balance out, how much pay cut at the top you need to keep paying your cleaners is not something that I am aware of. But I do know that in principle it's something that we could explore in a lot more detail, but which hasn't necessarily been the case. And I think there are understandable human reasons for that. Going back to this idea of freedoms, I don't want to wear a mask. It's uncomfortable. Versus, well, if you don't wear a mask, maybe you're the person that makes the vector that kills my grandma. I don't really want it less than £150,000 because I've got my expenses, and structural expenses exist. But the idea that an appropriate response to that is to then cut out the whole livelihood of other people, I think is a very, well, for me it's ethically dubious, and it's not aligned with the principles of sustainable development, which incidentally the university has just published a report about, saying how wonderful it is in contributing to these ends. So I'm now trying to think through on the spot some other critiques and criticisms that might be levelled. So one of my colleagues raised the point that students might have themselves worked many jobs in order to fund an education, and they may believe that face-to-face is the best value for that, and we need to recognise that. And I very much agree we need to consider this situation. But one thing I think is inevitable, as the government is planning at the national level and the university is planning at the institutional level, if the virus gets out of control, we will all be locked down again. No one will be going to class, and no one will be going to work. We'll be back to sort of the situation that we were in April. So while I agree with that, what I don't want to face is a situation in which we've actively said, yeah, it's fine. Come and do face-to-face. Come and do face-to-face. Thanks for working really hard and paying your tuition fee. And then have to turn around and say, actually, sorry, we've got this wrong. As a collective society, you're now locked in your room. As an individual, or as a whole cohort, as a whole housing block, or as a whole university. I mean, it may happen at the societal level. The government may have to reintroduce major lockdowns. And that is why I think what we need to do is think about this axis so we can make informed, intelligent choices now, and we can choose to voluntarily, through mutual agreement, relinquish some freedoms in order to preserve other freedoms, or to preserve a great possibility and probability of continuing with other freedoms that we greatly value. So from my second draft, from looking at my essay, I've now got a good number of points that I kind of reworked and addressed, hopefully made my essay better. I think I'm also now at 20 minutes, so that's 2 lots of 20 minutes, which is what the university has been telling us is appropriate. I didn't put an active learning exercise between my first and my second video, which I would be doing for my online teaching. But I guess now is the time to set your, if you're still listening, your online active learning opportunity, to take away all these ideas, this information that I've delivered to you, to think about it, to go away and try to triangulate it against other information, other opinion, and try to move towards having a evidence-based and critically derived understanding of the world, and therefore opinion on what might be best for society and what might be best for you, and therefore to then act in a way that is academically rigorous, that, yeah, the historians of 100 years' time may look back on and say, oh, that wasn't the right thing to do. But you in this moment can say with as much confidence as could ever be expected that, I thoroughly believe that the choices I'm making and the opinions I have are the best ones, or at least are constructed in the most rigorous way that I've got time to perform. I think if you behave like that in the world, you will be exceptional practitioners of sustainable